नहीं मेरा है।
तेरा मेरा मत कर सासू, ये पानी तो सबका है। थोड़ा थोड़ा बांट लो इसको, ये पानी तो सबका है। कैसे ये मुश्किल हल होगी, हम सबको ये सोचना है।
पानी बर्बाद नहीं करेंगे,
थोड़ा थोड़ा इस्तेमाल करेंगे।
ऐसे भविष्य से बचने के लिए पानी बर्बाद ना करें और बारिश के पानी का संरक्षण करें।
इस घर में हर पल हो खुशियों की दिवाली, आने वाली जो भी हो नन्ही सी एक जान है आने वाली। ध्यान रहे प्रसव होने तक देख रेख हो पूरी, सही समय पे टीके गोली लेना है जरूरी। जच्चा बच्चा की सुरक्षा परिवार के हाथ, इस घर में हर पल हो खुशियों की दिवाली। सुन लो बात वदे की हमने देखी।
जननी सुरक्षा योजना में पंजीकरण कराएं, सुरक्षित प्रसव और आर्थिक सहायता दोनों पाएं।
मिस्टर फुकन पेशे से अकाउंटेंट, हिसाब किताब में माहिर, हर प्रकार की चोरी पकड़ सकते हैं। पर एक चोरी तो लगातार हो रही है इनकी दृष्टि की, और वो चोर है काला मोतिया या ग्लूकोमा। चश्मे का नंबर बार बार बदलना, आंखों में तेज दर्द, नजर का दायरा कम होना, रोशनी में रंगीन गोले दिखाई देना, ये सभी काला मोतिया के लक्षण हैं। इन लक्षणों को नजरअंदाज ना करें और नेत्र विशेषज्ञ से अवश्य जांच करवाएं। याद रहे, देरी होने पर नजर हमेशा के लिए जा सकती है। अधिक जानकारी के लिए निकट के सरकारी अस्पताल एवं स्वयंसेवी संस्थाओं से संपर्क करें।
मेरे कारोबार में देरी के लिए कोई जगह नहीं, तो देश की तरक्की में देरी कैसी, इसलिए मैं समय पर सही सेवा कर चुकाता हूँ।
Enhancing beauty is my profession, but I also contribute to beautify my nation. I pay my service tax. Do you pay?
मैं सर्विस टैक्स भरदा हाँ, सीधी भरो ते मुल्क की तरक्की में अपना हिस्सा पाओ।
हमारा बढ़ता कारोबार बने देश की प्रगति का आधार।
समय पर सही सेवा कर चुकाए।
4, 5, 6 पंजे
30।
अरे वाह, दिमाग तो हवाई जहाज थे।
हवाई जहाज नहीं, रॉकेट।
हाँ, रॉकेट।
राकेट जी कहाँ?
अम्मा खेत में आई है।
जा रख ले। मुन्नी बीमार जो होने वाली है।
बीमार
नहीं होगी, खुले में शौच करेगी, उस पे मंडराएंगी मक्खियाँ, फिर वही मक्खियाँ तेरे बनाए खाने पर बैठ उसे दूषित करेंगी और मुन्नी को बीमार।
ये तो बड़ी दूर की सोची आपने।
तू भी सोच, घर में शौचालय बनवा और इस्तेमाल कर।
शुरू करें निर्मल भारत अभियान।
जहाँ सोच वहाँ शौचालय।
सन 1942 भारत छोड़ो आंदोलन की शुरुआत, जिसने हमें आजादी की राह दिखाई, और देखते ही देखते हम आजाद हो गए। लेकिन क्या हम सचमुच आजाद हैं? कैसे हो सकते हैं जब हमारे देश का लगभग हर दूसरा बच्चा कुपोषण का शिकार है? मतलब समझते हैं आप? यानी आने वाली पीढ़ी जिस पर टिका है हमारे देश का भविष्य, उसकी शक्ति आधी रह जाने वाली है, और जो सपने हम अपने बच्चों के लिए देख रहे हैं वो अधूरे रह जाने वाले हैं। ये भी गुलामी है, लेकिन इस बार दुश्मन ऐसा जो आसानी से दिखाई नहीं देता। फिर से जंग छेड़नी है, फिर से खदेड़ना है दुश्मन को बाहर, ताकि हमारे देश का भविष्य, हमारे बच्चों का भविष्य मजबूत हो सके। तो आइए मेरे साथ मिलकर कहिए, कुपोषण भारत छोड़ो।
Hello and welcome to Know Your MP, our show in which we bring you face to face with your elected representatives, members of parliament whom you have chosen to represent you in this, the 15th Lok Sabha. Even though our guest today calls himself an accidental politician, he has been a two-time member of the Raj Sabha, and in 2009 he was elected to the Lok Sabha, coming into parliament once again. Please allow me to welcome our member of parliament from Kendrapada in Orissa, Mr. Baijayant Panda. Welcome to the show, Mr. Panda.
Thank you.
Now, you have an engineering degree and a management degree. So how did politics become a calling?
Well, as you were saying, I describe myself as an accidental politician for that reason. I'm not from a political family. I was in the US for some years as a student. I came back to assist in the family business. Right. And this was in the 90s. And I found it very difficult to adjust with all the bureaucracy, red tape, and it was very frustrating. And I used to complain about it all the time. And my friends would tell me to either shut up or to do something about it. I started assisting the late Shri Biju Patnaik, who was a very close family friend. And then after he passed away, his son Naveen Patnaik stepped in and first became a member of parliament, and then he founded the Biju Janata Dal. And I was assisting him. And one thing led to another. I got more and more involved with the BJD right from the beginning stage. And then the rest you've already mentioned. I was in the Rajya Sabha for 2 terms, and then I got into the Lok Sabha.
But what made you decide to fight elections rather than enter through the Rajya Sabha?
Well, being in the Rajya Sabha, I was already getting more involved in our party matters and in representing the party as well as my state, obviously, in Delhi. And as I found myself getting more involved, obviously there is a credibility factor, and I think that is enhanced if you are also connected with the grassroots. And I was traveling quite extensively in Odisha, connecting with our party workers, and I was keen on getting into a direct election since I was getting more involved, and that is why the party gave me an opportunity in Kendrapada, and that's how I got involved.
Usually it's difficult to imagine someone coming, especially after being educated abroad, coming and sort of adjusting himself to the ground realities that exist in the rural India. How did you find it? How did you find the transition from your one reality to another?
I have actually not found it difficult at all, because whether you are educated or not, I think, or whether you have spent your entire life in a village or in a town in India, or you have been abroad, I think it is an attitudinal thing. And my attitude was that I wanted to connect with my constituents. My attitude has always been that I must spend time with them. I spend almost 2 weeks of the month on average in Kendrapada, traveling from village to village on a motorcycle and meeting my constituents. And I treat this as an adventure. And I treat it as something that I've chosen. Nobody forced me to do this. And I don't find it difficult at all.
But you also wear a lot of hats. You're a columnist, you're a skydiver, you're a bungee jumper, and also an avid reader, as you describe yourself in your Twitter account. How do you manage to do all this?
Well, I have been into adventure sports for a very long time, much before I was into politics. I still do a little bit of that, but I don't find too much time for skydiving, although I go bungee jumping occasionally. But I have always been an avid reader, particularly of non-fiction, particularly of biographies and history. And there is plenty of time to do that when you're traveling on planes, trains, even when Parliament gets adjourned and you are stuck. These are opportunities to catch up on your reading. And I've also always been involved in writing right from my school and college days. So I find it a useful way of expressing myself in writing columns for newspapers.
In fact, I've read a lot of your columns, and I really appreciate and admire your style and the way you express yourself. How do you find, do you think it's a challenge as a politician to sort of express yourself in writing about issues that are sort of being discussed in Parliament and are sort of taking up so much time of Parliament?
Yes, well, there are challenges sometimes, because very often parties take positions. And obviously, as a member of Parliament, you are representing a party, and you must also represent the party's positions. Now, the Indian polity has evolved in a way, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years, that party whips have become ever more powerful. So it is, the option of expressing yourself differently from a party is very limited. Now, be that as it may, I have chosen to be frank, whether I speak in Parliament, whether I speak on the media or outside. But obviously, if I have a certain position and the party's position is different, I may try internally to voice those opinions and get my party to hear out my viewpoint. But when it comes to abiding by the party's discipline, we all have to do that. So I think it is possible to be frank and at the same time not cross certain Lakshman Rekha
Right.
when it comes
But
to...
would you also give some credit to your party leadership, because there are parties who absolutely discourage this kind of expression in the media, and there are parties who have a more lenient or sort of understanding view of these things?
Indeed, I was just going to come to that point. In fact, the founder and president of our party, Shri Naveen Patnaik, who is the Chief Minister of Odisha, is himself a very educated, literate person. He himself has been a writer, and he has spent much time not only in India but abroad, and has seen the world. So he has the kind of vision and the attitude that that encourages people to think for themselves and to speak for themselves. So yes, I think the party's leadership is very important in fostering this kind of an attitude.
Right. In the past few months, the past year has been very difficult for the parliament, especially as far as credibility goes, credibility of the political class, and the decreasing faith, especially the younger members of the public have in politicians. How do you, as a young politician, find yourself, since you are also an exception to the general perception, how do you explain yourself about your colleagues to a younger audience?
Well, first of all, I think you are very right that the Indian demographics have changed a lot. You have got almost half the country is very young, and this is a generation that has grown up with information. They're not limited to one TV channel. They're not limited to not knowing what is happening in the outside world. So they know the world and they have views, and I think it is not wrong to say that many of them are disappointed by Indian politics as it is today and disappointed by politicians. And I have said so myself. In the columns that I write, I have often written about this. And when I communicate with younger audiences in India, I try to put things in perspective. First of all, there is no getting around the issue that politics has a credibility crisis today. So that must be acknowledged up front.
Right.
And so I don't try to deny it. It doesn't, you can't deny a reality which is staring you in the face. But having acknowledged that Indian politics is going through a credibility crisis, I try to put things in perspective that democracy is a slow process, and also our democracy is a work in progress. Right. And we have seen other democracies, for example, the United States 100 years ago was going through similar changes. They had something called the Gilded Age in the late 19th century, where they had similar problems, very similar to what Indian polity is passing through today. And it was followed by something called the Progressive Era, where a lot of reforms were brought around, political systems were changed, and it became more transparent and gained credibility. And I have been putting it in context like that we are also evolving. And what is required today is for younger Indians, middle-class Indians, and others who have generally been apathetic in the past to get more engaged, to get more involved in the political dialogue, and to help bring about this consensus that we must change.
Right. This kind of engagement that you talk about, we saw a lot of it in the last year, especially with the civil society campaign. A lot of youngsters were mobilized, and they started attending these movements. But do you think there needs to be a deeper understanding of issues and a deeper understanding, appreciation of India's democracy, especially when we are surrounded by neighbors who have sort of not done very well?
Yes, I think our greatest boast for a long time has been that we have managed to retain democracy in a neighborhood that has not been democratic. But this neighborhood has also been changing, and on many parameters today, on social parameters, some of our neighbors are outperforming us. So we can't rest on our laurels anymore. We need to go beyond just saying that we've got democracy. We need to demonstrate that democracy is better. And it usually is, I mean, if you look at history. But the point is, our democracy also needs certain changes. I have been also writing about an issue that although we have been independent since 1947, certain aspects of our parliamentary functioning were actually decided in 1919 during the British Raj, and it was designed to control the proto-parliament, the pre-independence parliament, so that it didn't become totally free. And we are still abiding by those rules, and some of those rules need to change. One example I'll cite to you. The biggest problem is that Parliament gets adjourned very often because the opposition and the government cannot agree on the agenda, whether there should be a discussion on a certain matter. And if it is a discussion, should it be a voting discussion or a non-voting discussion? This depends on consensus. That is our practice. Now, when you depend on consensus, then one side or another side always has a veto power. They can say, we don't agree. We don't agree to have a discussion, or we don't agree to have a voting discussion. So Parliament gets stuck. If you look at other democracies, they all have rules that if X number of MPs demand such and such motion, it will have to happen. If Y number of MPs demand such and such discussion or vote, it will happen. We need to evolve such rules so that it is not left to the mercy of consensus. Other democracies don't leave it to consensus. They leave it to rules, specific rules. And we must do the same thing.
You have also been writing about the kind of introspection that the political class needs to go into, not deny the elephant in the room, so to speak. How would you bring that about, especially when you have really older senior politicians who seem to have seen it all, and younger politicians like you, we need to do all the convincing?
Well, we must also recognize that the older generation, whether it is in politics or any other field, they have certain wisdom that we can gain from. But we also need to acknowledge that the younger generation has a certain wisdom because they are impatient for change, and we must find a balance between the two. In other words, we can't resist change just because things have been a certain way for so many decades. Right. And at the same time, in a democratic system, you can't bulldoze change overnight. But what that means is change must happen. You can't just have a stoppage of change. Change must happen, but in a pace where people can participate and everybody's consent can be taken. And even if they don't agree, if a majority wants change, then it happens. So I think we need to find the right balance, but there is no getting away from the fact that we need certain systemic changes. And I think it will happen because the mood of the country is gradually building up to such a level that there will be no option left for us but to make these changes to meet the demands of our citizens.
Time for us to slip into a short break. We'll be back once again on the other side with a lot more questions.
बेटा रो क्यों रही हो? बोलो।
उन्होंने मुझे मेरे बालों को छुआ।
बच्चे और उनके माता-पिता बाल यौन उत्पीड़न के प्रति सजग हों तो अनिष्ट से बचा जा सकता है। बाल यौन अपराध से सुरक्षा अधिनियम 2012 के तहत अपराधी को सख्त सजा देने का प्रावधान है।
योग केवल योगासन नहीं, अष्टांग योग है जो तन, मन और आत्मा की शुद्धि करता है।
ओम शरीर मन का हो संतुलन, रोग मुक्त रहे तन।
योग हमारे ऋषि मुनियों की अनमोल देन है जिसकी विज्ञान मान्य तकनीक को आधुनिक जीवन के अनुकूल बनाया गया है। इसलिए तो पूरी दुनिया आज योग के माध्यम से स्वास्थ्य का लाभ कर रही है। और आप
जो करे योगासन, स्वस्थ रहे तन मन।
बाल श्रमिक दंडनीय अपराध है। ये कानून 14 साल से कम उम्र के किसी भी बच्चे को घरेलू नौकर, ढाबे पर कर्मचारी या और किसी भी घातक काम में लगाने से रोकता है। अगर कोई व्यक्ति ऐसा करता है तो उसे 3 महीने से लेकर 1 साल तक की सजा के साथ साथ 10,000 से 20,000 रुपए तक का जुर्माना भुगतना पड़ सकता है।
बच्चों से काम मत कराइए, उन्हें पढ़ाई का हक है, उनका सही जगह स्कूल है।
कितनी चीनी? 1.5 चम्मच? नहीं, मेरे लिए नहीं, मुझे डायबिटीज है। आपने अपनी खान पान की आदतों को नियंत्रण में रखा है, ये अच्छा है। मधुमेह के रोगी के लिए ये बहुत जरूरी है। जरूरी है? हाँ, मधुमेह का असर सारे शरीर पर होता है, खास तौर पर आँखों पर। इससे अंधे भी हो सकते हैं।
यदि आपको डायबिटीज है तो दृष्टि सुरक्षा पर अवश्य ध्यान दें। समय समय पर नेत्र विशेषज्ञ से अपनी आँखों की जांच करवाएं।
मैंने अभी जॉब करना शुरू किया है और मेरे लिए टैक्स सेविंग बहुत जरूरी है। LIC इज अ कूल चॉइस। LIC हमेशा से ही एक भरोसेमंद ऑप्शन रहा है और आगे भी रहेगा।
बैंकिंग तो एक झमेला है यार। इलाहाबाद बैंक का सेविंग्स बैंक अकाउंट ट्राई करो। उनके पास है नेट बैंकिंग, टैक्स और बिलों का ऑनलाइन पेमेंट, आरटीजीएस और एनईएफटी द्वारा तुरंत फंड ट्रांसफर, इंटरनेशनल डेबिट कम एटीएम कार्ड, फोन बैंकिंग। अरे वाह, बैंकिंग अब चुटकी में यार। इलाहाबाद बैंक।
बाय, ड्राइव सेफली।
आप एक कार क्यों नहीं ले लेते?
वो तो बस एक सपना है। वैसे भी मेरा स्कूटर है ना हमें घुमाने के लिए। शारदा, शारदा, ये गाड़ी किसकी है?
आपका सपना था ना।
ये
सपने अब सच होंगे।
आंध्रा बैंक।
अरे सुन तो।
मुझे क्या सुनाना चाहते हो? जो सुनाओ मेरी सौतन को।
किसको?
अरे वही तुम्हारा मोबाइल फोन जिससे सुबह शाम दिन रात चिपके रहते थे और कहते थे किसान कॉल सेंटर से बातें हो रही हैं।
अच्छा ये बात है।
हाँ, क्यों? क्या हुआ? अब बात नहीं होती क्या?
अब तो झट से बात हो जाती है।
ऐसा क्या?
हाँ, अब तो ज्यादा लाइनें और खास तकनीक के कारण खेती के माहिरों से तुरंत बात हो जाती है। और अगर कभी लाइन व्यस्त हो तो अपनी समस्या फोन पर रिकॉर्ड करा दो, वहाँ से फोन आ जाता है और समस्या की हल का मैसेज भी आ जाता है। ये देखो आ गया।
अरे वाह, इसका मतलब इंतजार की घड़ी अब खत्म।
हाँ,
तभी मैं सोचूं कि आजकल मुझ पर इतना प्यार क्यों आ रहा है।
कृषि संबंधी समस्याओं का अपनी भाषा में तुरंत हल पाने के लिए पूरे भारत में किसी भी फोन से हेल्पलाइन नंबर पर संपर्क करें। किसानों का दोस्त किसान कॉल सेंटर।
Welcome back. After the break, we are talking to our MP from Kendrapada, Odisha, Mr. Baijayant Panda. Mr. Panda, we were talking about the change, the essential, the necessity for change that has to come into Indian politics. Your example has been, in a way, you have been lucky to have had that proximity to a big, great leader of your state. But a lot of people who are desirous of coming into politics do not have that advantage. How do you think they should work their way into politics?
Indeed, I think you have hit upon a very important aspect today, because we have very high barriers to entry into politics. Even though I was not from a political family, you are quite right. We were family friends with the late Shri Biju Patnaik's family, and that gave me access and the initial opportunity to work with him and Shri Naveen Patnaik for this party. But that is not how things ought to work. How things ought to work is that any average citizen ought to be able to get involved in politics. And today we have barriers, because if you are not from a political family, there seems to be a great degree of hurdles that you have to overcome to get involved in politics. There are financial hurdles. Our political funding system is non-transparent. And if you are an average citizen and you want to get involved, it's going to be very, very difficult. Also, within political parties, there needs to be more participation. The manner in which candidates are chosen, the manner in which the hierarchy of political parties are run, they need to be more transparent and they need to be more participative. Unless this happens, it prevents the average citizen from getting involved. And when I gave you the example earlier about other democracies which have had changes and transformations, this is exactly what happened. And I'll give you an example from, again, the Gilded Age and the progressive era of the United States more than 100 years ago. If you go back to the late 19th century, their candidate selection used to be a very hush-hush process. It was a backroom process. There was no public involvement. And it was just a few leaders who would pull strings and make things happen. And that is very similar to how mostly candidate selection happens in India today. Whereas the transformation they saw was that they introduced the primary system. So there were internal votes in parties, and popular candidates got selected who had a better chance of getting elected.
Right.
Now some parties are trying to emulate them. In my party, for instance, in the Biju Janata Dal, right from the beginning, we have depended a lot on very professional outside opinion polls and surveys to determine which candidates are popular or which potential candidates are popular and are going to win. So we have certain degree of professionalism in the party. But we need to do more across the board in all the parties to make it more transparent.
A big question which is sort of been on the mind of people, especially in the press, is that how do you determine merit in politics? Because it's something very intangible, it's very difficult to describe. And since you were telling us about how your party has taken a pioneering step towards making it more scientific, so to speak, how can merit be defined in politics?
Well, I think first of all I should say that every party in India can improve and can get better at this. But merit in politics ultimately comes to winning seats.
Right.
So I think there are many ways of looking at it. What my party does is it looks at the winnability of the candidate. It looks at the track record of the candidate. We also try to encourage youth and women. So these are all factors that you can look at in establishing. But ultimately in a political system, candidates must be able to win seats. And that has to have, it usually will have, whether you like it or not, the most important weightage in deciding candidates.
Right. You've also been very active in Parliament, raising questions, introducing private member bills. In fact, very recently you've introduced a private member bill about making the packaging of cigarettes less attractive. How do you think that will help?
First of all, let me point out, as you are aware, that for more than 40 years now, the tradition has become in the Indian Parliament that private members' bills don't pass. And that's a shame. I personally disagree with that. I think we ought to revert back to a system where private members' bills can pass or should pass. Nevertheless, even if it doesn't pass, it remains a potent tool. Because if a private member's bill gathers enough steam, gathers enough traction that a lot of MPs support it, and it threatens to become a bill that can pass, then the government co-opts it and makes it its own law, and that becomes the law of the land. Right. So it still is a very useful tool to try and pressurize the government into amending a law or to enacting a new law. Now you raised the Tobacco Plain Packaging Act. I want to tell you. Now India is a signatory to the World Health Organization norms. This came in because worldwide every year 6 million people die from tobacco related causes. And out of those 6 million, 1 million of them are in India. And India is among the top 5 countries suffering from healthcare costs. We spend about 35,000 crores every year on healthcare related to tobacco usage. So we have a bill already on having graphic displays and warnings which are on cigarette packaging. But other countries are going far beyond. Now Australia has passed a law since last year which requires that the tobacco packages should not have logos and the warning graphic should be much bigger. Now if you take out the logos and just have plain writing of the name of the brand, then the allure goes down, because part of the allure of tobacco is because of the very large budgets marketing and advertising the tobacco product by brand. So if you reduce that brand allure, then the usage will be less. Now this law in Australia has already withstood challenges in courts on constitutionality and freedom of speech. Right. And other countries are going ahead. You know, it is shocking to hear that even countries like Pakistan and our other neighbors like China and even Sri Lanka, they are far ahead of India in terms of imposing these disincentives for tobacco usage. So I have proposed this bill to make plain packaging the norm, right, and to increase the graphic which shows the harmful effects of tobacco usage.
Right. We were talking about the private member bill. You mentioned how difficult it is to get them passed. As politicians who have won seats, one of your biggest strengths is that you can mobilize people and campaign and go door to door if need be. How difficult is it to sort of mobilize support in the House itself?
Well, it depends on the issue, of course. On many issues, parties have stands already, and it is difficult to get individual opinions or individual MPs to take a stand, because if a party has already taken a stand. Right. But I think there are plenty of subjects on which we can actually...
For example,
this is one example. Right. Let me give you another example. For now 4 or 5 years, many of us MPs cutting across party lines have been working on the issue of malnutrition. We have formed a group called the Citizens Alliance Against Malnutrition. This involves MPs cutting across many parties.
So they're all young MPs or of a certain age?
They're mostly younger MPs, right, but many others as well. And they work with also celebrities from Bollywood who are coming up with campaigns to highlight the cause of malnutrition. This is an advocacy group, and our idea is that tackling malnutrition should not get politicized. Right. It should not be a party issue. Right. And the idea is that we must sensitize the media, that just as the media highlights Bollywood or cricket, they should highlight that we are still a developing country, right, where almost 1 out of every 2 children is malnourished, and that needs to get addressed. We also engage with the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition and also state governments to highlight this cause.
So this is an example where younger MPs, more connected MPs, more socially acceptable MPs are sort of using the platform that they have won.
You mentioned platforms. In fact, there are many platforms. Apart from our personal contacts with each other in Parliament, knowing each other, today social media is a wonderful platform. So when I put up my private members' bills, I post it on my website, I talk about it on social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, and that gets a lot of citizens get interested. They lobby support for it by writing to media and writing to MPs. So these are methods to get interest in laws or bills that we want to bring about.
Let's talk about your constituency, Kendrapada. What are the specific challenges of representing such a place?
The typical challenges, really, because Kendrapada is an agricultural district which has, I have more than 1.5 million voters, which is typical of a Lok Sabha constituency. And we are at the fag end of the Mahanadi river system with dozens of tributaries, which means that going short distances can take a very long time because we don't have adequate infrastructure. We need many bridges, we need more roads. These are happening, but because of historical backlog, they are taking time to happen. Now, poverty is something that is gradually decreasing, but that doesn't mean it will go away overnight. So you still have issues to deal with. As I said, I spend almost 2 weeks every month on average going around, not making speeches or doing rallies, but going village to village and meeting with my constituents and understanding their issues. So I spend the rest of my time taking up developmental projects with the state government, with the central government, and taking up these issues in Parliament. So I would say these are typical challenges, and obviously we need to provide many more livelihood options. We need to bring about more investment, job opportunities. These are things that I work on.
If I were to ask you what is the biggest legacy or the biggest strength of the Indian democracy in our 65 years, what would you say?
I think the single biggest contribution that democracy has given us in these last 65 years is that it has enfranchised groups of people that for hundreds of years and sometimes thousands of years have not had a voice. Our Dalits, for instance, tribals, for instance, many other categories of Indian citizens for centuries did not have a voice. Today they have found a voice. Now, this has prevented the kind of violence or the kind of dictatorships that we have seen in our surrounding neighborhoods and other parts of the world. We have also done reasonably well in terms of bringing people out of poverty, initially at a very slow rate, now over the last 20 years at a slightly better rate. Right. And most importantly, today we are focusing on governance issues. So states which have been traditionally very backward, states like Odisha, states like Bihar, and many other states in my neighborhood, they have today started performing better than the national average. So this proves that democracy can give a voice to people. It can also provide economic improvement for people. And we need to take this much more forward.
On that positive note, we'll end this interview. Thanks very much for speaking to us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That was Mr. Baijayant Panda, Member of Parliament from Kendrapada in Odisha. We'll be back once again next week with another MP. Until then, this is your host, Neeraj Singh, saying thanks for watching. Goodbye.